Hello everybody and welcome to the launch of the new Adelphi film. It's a 15-minute creative documentary about the University of Central Lancashire's new public square and its surrounding spaces. I'm Kate Rosendale from Blog Preston, and tonight I'll be talking to one of the film's makers, Johnny Randall, and Charles Quick, who is Professor of Public Art Practice at UCLan and co-curator of In Certain Places. We will, of course, be premiering the film itself tonight, plus we'll be taking questions from you at home. The event's going to finish at around 7:30 p.m, so any questions that remain will be covered on Blog Preston in the coming days. So first of all, I'd like to properly introduce Johnny and Charles. Johnny is an award-winning freelance filmmaker and creative arts practitioner. His short documentaries often focus on how our identities are shaped by place. Johnny has delivered a variety of community arts projects across the UK, and a selection of his short films have been screened at festivals worldwide. In 2018, he won the Inspiration Award at the Arts Humanities Research Council's Research in Film Awards for a short creative documentary, which was commissioned by Mirador in collaboration with Tom Diffenthal, and Adelphi is their second film collaboration. On to Charles. As mentioned, Charles is Professor of Public Art Practice at UCLan and co-curator of In Certain Places, and that's a public art research project that makes connections between people and places in Preston. Charles has over 40 years' experience as a teacher, artist, researcher and curator. During his career, he's produced major public art projects in cities across the UK. Since 2003, his practice as an artist and curator has been within In Certain Places, which he co-founded. Memorable works with that involve the People's Canopy, a large red mobile canopies that fill the streets of Preston and that have since been seen in Hong Kong, China and Belgium. His most recent project was Beautiful and Brutal, 50 Years in the Life of Preston Bus Station. So in 2015, Charles began working with UCLan to create a series of projects by In Certain Places that feed into the development of the square and the public aspects of the new student centre, and the most recent one being the commissioning of the film that we are launching tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Johnny, who is going to introduce the film Adelphi.
Yeah, so Charles from In Certain Places and Ian Banks from Atoll got in touch about 1.5 years ago to say that they were commissioning a series of arts projects that responded to the creation of UCLan's new student building and the new public square in the Adelphi Quarter in Preston. They said that they were interested in commissioning a film, and they'd seen a short documentary that I'd made previously with my collaborator Tom Diffenthal. So they invited us to put forward some ideas about how we might respond to the creation of this new public space in the centre of Preston. We knew that at the centre of the film, we were interested in the idea of how people shape the identity of a public space. We wanted the film to look at physical construction processes as well as different aspects of the square's development, in which included perspectives from architects, designers, university students and staff and local residents. Rather than following a linear process of documenting the building from start to finish, we chose to focus on gathering material over a window of several months and to use that as a platform from which to explore some broader themes of how people use public spaces. The intention wasn't to make a marketing piece for UCLan, but to create a short film which speculates about what this space could be and that hopefully engages the public on that issue. The aim was to create a film which asks questions about what possibilities the square might offer as a piece that, as a place that is shared by both the students and the public of Preston. So the purpose of the film is to exist as a dialogue opener in that sense. So in that vein, I look forward to the conversation after the film. Here it is.
Only a fiver here, fiver, all kids. Only £5. Clear them up,
You think of a heart as beating, of being active, being stimulated, and of also being a stimulus in itself, of being a catalyst.
The need for a public space, I suppose, is always going to be, yes, but what are we going to curate to be there? What are we going to programme to be there?
When you think about public spaces, it's often quite easy to think about the big, amazing events that can happen there. But actually, it's the small, routine stuff that's equally as important. People just going about their daily life.
Stalls and markets or Christmas events through to protests or demonstrations. The great thing about public squares is the diversity of activities that can happen within the city can use, they can adopt, it's there, so they're there in use.
For me, one of the most interesting aspects of architecture is the way in which you almost create a kind of container where human activity happens. If you think of every kind of event in a person's life, you'll always think of an event as taking place somewhere. Place is always influenced by the built environment. So architecture is kind of the container for the lives of so many of us. And I think the ability as an architect to influence those spaces, to enhance lives that people are living in by any small way, is something that makes me feel positive.
I'm excited to see that really that I'm going to be making history with everybody. I've watched the university grow from nothing up to where it is now. And I think it's generations that are coming that are going to see all this. But I'm here at the beginning and watching it being done.
A public space that has buildings around it that don't interact with it in any way is, in almost all instances, going to be unsuccessful as a public space. You may get people cutting across it or using it just for their daily travel. In terms of activating a space, you need functions that are going to make people want to slow down and spend some time in that space.
Uninspiring, blank, concrete space with just a couple of bench seats. People aren't going to want to come and sit and have the lunch there.
Sometimes you go in a public square and you'll feel exposed walking through it. And other spaces, the design allows or facilitates you to pause and reflect and stop and look at your surroundings. Designing spaces that allow lots of different types of activities, lots of different use, and people to engage them in different ways, I think is really important.
When you're designing a public space, there's always a attitude of if you build it, they will come, which isn't always the case. That's obviously a very passive way to look at it. It can be successful, it's not always successful, but for us it's really important to actually make sure that you're doing things that really activate that space.
It's the longevity of something within a space, or an aspect within a space. And if you keep coming back to it at different points in your life, I think that creates that sense of ownership and pride a little bit.
When you deliver a scheme, you kind of envisage how it's going to be used. You think, well, this is where people are going to meet, this is where people are going to have lunch. You kind of have a perceived vision of how that space is going to be used.
It's about creating innovative and playful and engaging experiences.
It's really difficult to get a public space to be operational as you intend, because people sometimes tend to stay to the peripheries. As human beings, we don't like to look centre stage, we want to have an idea about what's going on, so we'll normally walk around them rather than through them.
I think the boundary definition is often, in terms of perception, is what will inform people of whether a space is public and accessible or perhaps feels private and you can't enter. So for example, a wall or a fence defines an area as being something that's exclusive, whereas kind of a big open space that has no borders, more often than not, will feel much more inclusive.
It's important not just for me to feel that a space is mine, but for the public generally to feel that it is theirs. We need to get away from this feeling that I'm on somebody else's land. We need to feel more like, yeah, this is mine as well.
I think public art has got a really important role to play in public spaces. It generates different conversations. It's kind of something outside of the norm. It's something that has been either sculpted or placed there with intention.
Pattern, it's so universal that people connect it to so many different cultures, and no matter what background or what religion or where you come from, you connect to it.
The artwork doesn't exist unless it's got people as part of it. For the artwork, the public space, it all becomes one thing.
It creates a sense of belonging, having that introduction of art and connecting people to art who wouldn't normally go to museums. The more beautiful you make a space, the more kind of ownership people will have with that space, and the more ownership people have, the more longevity the space will have.
Ownership isn't necessarily something that happens on day one.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You can't open a new public space and suddenly expect everybody to feel ownership of that space. It builds and it grows and it strengthens over time. think it's to do with memory and recognition and people actually building a kind of long-term relationship with the space.
The relationship with the world is really guided by our memories of our past experiences. It's interesting when you think about how that relates to spaces in the city.
The way that the space is designed, the way that it makes you feel, whether it's by the extent of planting, the use of quality materials, the appropriate scale, can prevent spaces from feeling intimidating, and actually it can make them welcoming, and it can make people feel relaxed and sociable.
In any public space there needs to be beauty. If there's beauty, then the morale of anyone who passes by or uses a space is lifted.
So the idea is that the square kind of bleeds out in all directions. It bleeds into the buildings, it bleeds into the surrounding highways scheme, and it bleeds south into the city. The square has very much been seen as the heart of that. It's the heart of the campus, which also happens to be on the doorstep between the campus and the university. And the intention is that it will strengthen the links between the institution and the wider public. And its location in relation to the city and the campus, it will definitely be a place where there'll be pedestrian traffic moving through it.
If I wasn't involved in this, I would see this change as being a massively positive thing for the city. You're taking out a horrible traffic-filled roundabout. You were discouraging traffic from that area and certainly slowing it down and making it a safer place for pedestrians and cyclists.
The removal of the kind of roundabout that may or may not have served its function, for us to now have this kind of gateway into the university and the gateway into thought and thinking is exciting. In more recent times, the us and them mentality is maybe emerged from the kind of travelling student population, the ones that go home in the summer and don't come back until the term time.
I don't want the university to think it's them and us. No, I want to say it's us. We're all part of it.
Maybe the new square will be perhaps a springboard for that kind of integration with the students and the public.
With Adelphi Square, it will certainly be the beating heart of the campus on a regular day-to-day basis. But we'd also hope that in the longer term, it becomes a key attraction for the city to enter into that space and to share that space with the university.
Hello everybody, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the film. Hope it gave you some food for thought around the new square and some of the possibilities there. We are now going to move on to the discussion with Johnny and Charles. So something that I wanted to pick up on first that struck me about the film is that moment when it talks about being a gateway to thought. And I think the film is very much a conversation starter. So Johnny, was that one of the drivers behind the film?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we knew that the film really needed to work as a conversation starter, because as I said sort of a little bit in the intro, that we couldn't we made a decision not to sort of do a documentation of the start and the end of the process of the building. And so really the film was about speculating about what this space might be, and what kinds of things might happen there. How might it be used by people, and also I think we wanted to look at how we can only imagine what might happen there, and present some possibilities for that, and that how and to embrace the uncertainty of how the identity of a place does change and evolve over time as people use it, because you can kind of plan all the things in the world of how it might be used, but you can't know in reality in the future how that space might be used. And I think one of the things that I found really fascinating about speaking with the architects, for example, is how public spaces are designed to respond to how people behave in public and on streets, and to think about how public spaces are really shaped in the design process as well as in reality.
What did you think? Did you think people were having an impact on the way the space was being designed? Did you think people were
in terms of the contributors? Do you mean, Charles?
Yeah. Did that sort of come through?
I think people. I mean, I only spoke to a sort of a limited number of local residents in terms of their views on it. But yeah, they said that that they felt that that they'd had some input in terms of when the consultancies were happening in the building process and that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, there were some viewpoints from Margaret, who owns a local florist at the site there, and yeah, she sort of seemed to see it as a place of possibility. And David Toes, who is another local resident who I spoke to as well, had very vested interest because it was looking out of his front window, and he was able to sort of talk a bit about the challenges of that space as well, and what that might mean for it being, and the importance as well of it feeling like a space that was for the public of Preston and not just for the students. I think that was something to really have a conversation about.
Yeah, I thought your film really sort of brought those things out in that sense, and it was a nice balance of conversations. Did you have to work quite hard to find all these voices?
Well, initially we knew that wanted to have quite a range of people, and so knew that I wanted to speak to people who are involved in the design, in people who are local residents, people who were involved in creating an artistic response to the place as well. And so I think, I mean, it would have been amazing to have spoken to an even greater number of people, but it was about trying to get a breadth of responses and a breadth of perspectives on what that public space means to people, with a smaller number of kind of contributors, but hopefully that kind of have a film in which the contributors feel as if they're representatives of a particular, of different perspectives on it.
Yeah, I thought there were some really interesting comments in there, and I was quite taken back by people's level of engagement with a space which wasn't there yet. You know, it was a fictional space in some senses. You know, it's being built, and your film was sort of very much sort of capturing a moment in time, really, a mixture of construction and what the place might be in the future. I was really interested in how you brought those two things together in the film, this sort of the moment now, the construction bit, and then this the future, people talking about the future. How did you sort of manage to model that to sort of fit seamlessly together?
Well, it was something that I tried to do through some visual sequences in the film, really, and that was where the idea for getting the drummers on board was based, really. So one of the kind of real challenges of making the film was how to, knowing that we couldn't film, at some stage in the future or years down the line as it is being used, as its use becomes a reality. So it was finding a way in which to imagine what might be. And so in that sense, we had the idea of kind of using the building site as a stage almost, and having different sort of different visual scenarios play out on that mud stage, if you like. So that was the thinking behind working with the Worldwide Samba drummers, and some other people as well, to construct those sequences of people playing games, of people having food there, of sitting, relaxing, watching the world go by, and the drummers working with the drummers was a way of trying to envisage what kinds of community events might happen in that space in the future, and saying, well, these are some of the possibilities, and to say that, yeah, it's I think hopefully it's a visually playful way of presenting some of those ideas about what the future might be like, because we can't picture it, but we can sort of present something interesting that is on the site now, with a view to that hopefully sparking other thoughts as to how it might be used in the future.
I think one of the most important questions about that, with the stage being the building site, is how on earth anybody got the boots clean afterwards.
It was yeah, people got very muddy, and it was very cold. Like it was a day in November, but I mean, they were so, I was so grateful to them for being so generous and up for the idea. I mean, I've had no idea whether they'd be up for it. It was just initially that when I'd contacted them, and I was just really bowled over by how up for it they were. I said, okay, so we're making this film, and it's about this new public space that's being built on the building site just outside of UCLan, and one of the ideas is that we might want to present some of the things that might happen there. Would you be up for coming along and doing a sort of faux performance, if you like? But yeah, I was really grateful for how up for it they were, and for how uncomplaining they were, at least on the day, about that. But yeah, it was it was good to do.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of positivity throughout the film. Certainly the first time that I saw it, it made me really think about the possibilities for that space. I originally came to Preston as a student, but it's quite a while since I graduated now, so I'm definitely in the resident category. But even so, for me, I live 10 minutes away. I now see that as actually an exciting possibility for a new space nearby. And I just wanted to ask Charles around that. There's two sides of the city where we have the student population and we have the residents, and how this is going to open up possibilities for both those camps.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question, and it's sort of those thoughts, I suppose, about university and community really underpinned our approach to designing the space. From when we started conversations with the community and the university, our neighbours, sixth form students who would be using the space in the future, and also people from the curative community in Preston as well, all fed into workshops. And it became quite clear from that process that there was a real desire from everybody to have a space that could be used by everybody. And the universities embraced that. So it's worked really hard to create a space which can support all sorts of events, from some of its larger events that it does already, where it invites the community onto the campus, like the science festival that has sort of tens of thousands of people, and the degree shows and the art design exhibitions, but also looking at new opportunities where communities can actually take the lead in that space. I think it's a space that has a whole range of scales built into it, so you can have very small things that might be lunchtime things, evening things, but then you can have quite large, spectacular things, and it's been designed with sort of hidden infrastructure really to allow all those sorts of things to happen. So
we've had a couple of questions in the comments on this on this topic as well. So Erin says, I was a student in Preston for 5 years. I always felt there was a kind of disconnection between the student population and the local residents. Does this seek to change that?
Oh, there's a big one, isn't there? It's interesting that thing of universities being sort of separate to their communities, and I suppose in some ways that's historical and comes from physical things. So our very old universities, Cambridge, Oxford, Durham, and so on, were like gated communities. So they were closed spaces that were locked at night. People didn't really have access to them. I suppose our campus here is very different. You know, it's an open campus. There are no gates or walls. So then it's more about those sort of social barriers that perhaps exist or perceived to exist between students and the university. So I do hope this space, and it's certainly the intention of the university, will work towards actually community and university. So I'm saying university rather than just student, because obviously the university involves lots of staff, teaching staff, support staff, admin staff, some who live in Preston, some who have been students in the past. So it's never a clear-cut thing. But I certainly think this space will help, because it's going to sort of visualize things far more. We haven't had this space before at the university that can visualize things. Much more make visible, actually, all the work that goes on across the university where it does work with communities.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to kind of offer a response to it as well, just in term, I think, yeah, like certainly in talking to people for the film, it felt like, you know, there was a sense that there was very much a student and public residence divide in the city, and that I think that's something which I would hope the creation of this space can address, and can but I think that it's something that's yeah, important to look at in terms of seeing it as a shared space, and seeing it as somewhere that offers events and yeah, events and other things that can happen there that are for both, that it feels like it's of both. And also, I mean, I think Margaret Mason, who owns the Florist, put it really wonderfully. She said that, you know, I want it to not be us and them, but us. And I think, yeah, I think that that's a good statement of intent.
Yeah, and I think it's one that the university embraces as well. You know, it definitely sees the space perhaps as a bridging space between the university and the city. And I think it's definitely a space where we want to actually bring people together to do things, not just as participants or audience, but actually as instigators as well. That's really important. We wanted a space where the community can instigate different events and happenings, and on lots of different scales. You know, there's going to be a cafe on the ground floor. There's permanent seating and moving seating. Obviously, space will change throughout seasons, but I think there's a real opportunity there to have this space which brings people together.
Somebody's mentioned in the chat as well about Friargate and how the square will connect to Friargate, and then I suppose by extension, it's from there it will extend through to the city centre. I was on Friargate the other night, and that's just the amount of eateries down there now is great, isn't it? So it's interesting that that's going to be the connecting street as well.
It is in many ways. I think, you know, sometimes people complain about Friargate, saying, you know, there are too many eateries and so forth. But no, not me. But I think it's a wonderful space because actually you could walk across the world, you know, by eating in different places. And I do eat in them. I like to try the different places. And again, you get a real mixture of people in those places as well. It's not just students by a long stretch of imagination. So I think I know there's the university and the city have been working really hard to try and perhaps be able to, in the future, pedestrianise Friargate, really change its dynamics and make it a central route to the university, and perhaps change also the ringway and the crossing, how you cross it a bit more to make it a bit more friendly, pedestrian friendly. So I do think in the future that square could link so much more with the city, and of course it's one of many squares now in the city. So there's a lot to talk about. Anything we do on the square in terms of events has to be in collaboration with the rest of the city. So that we have the flag market, which everybody knows is the central space for activity. Covered markets a bit. The new square outside the bus station, which is wonderful for racing. You know, 170 meters long, longer than the Blackpool Tower let down. So you know we must have races in front of the bus station, I think, of some sort or another. And then you've got Avonham, you know, with its wonderful natural amphitheatre and all the events that have happened there. And now we've got the university space as well. So Preston is really going to be quite a premier city for outdoor spaces. And a lot of them are actually now have the infrastructure to allow sort of events to happen quite effortlessly.
We've had a question around that in the chat from Lucy W. How do you think the space will encourage its use? Is there any plan for events or facilities that could attract the wider community to the area and by extension promote interaction with UCLan?
Yeah, I think that reinforces all the things we've been talking about, really. And I do think it's important to think of not just big events, I don't know, film shows or bands and things like that, but also these things that happen every day, you know, this ability to hang out in that space, to sit there, enjoy the fact it faces south, you know, on the sunny days we get in Preston, but also a cafe that has, you know, a big glass wall that faces south as well. Hopefully it will be a space where people just naturally come together, because that's when the exciting things actually happen, you know, rather than orchestrated.
Yeah. I think while we're on this sort of topic, we'll take another question from the chat. So Colin Randall asked, has the design of the space been finalised, or will this film help to feed into the way the space is shaped? And we've also had a question from Wood Pigeon about how COVID might change how we use public spaces generally, which I guess would feed into the question around design as well, and whether there might need to be any changes.
Okay, that's interesting. That's a big question. So one of the intentions of commissioning Johnny and Tom to create the film was that it would question how this space could be used, what it could be used for. So the design is finalised, but the mechanics of how it's actually used and operated, facilitated, are definitely still undergoing discussion. So the film has already been a really useful tool to actually, for people within the university to think, okay, right, we haven't quite thought about that. Maybe we need to look at this again. How do we do that? In terms of COVID, that's a big one, isn't it? All our spaces are changing, so we all navigate our streets, let alone the city centre, in a far different way than we used to. And even the city council is changing things, so putting bike lanes in, and then when we queue outside shops, then stickers on the floor, so we see queues outside shops. So lots of different things are changing. So I think COVID will have an influence on the space, but actually in some ways it's will be very helpful for the university to have a very large outdoor public space, which we don't have at the moment at all, because the outdoor is becoming quite valuable. It seems to be more valuable than the inside at the moment. So I think we will be looking at it, hopefully in creative ways, to see how we can use that space if we still have to have COVID imposed upon us at that time when it's finally opened in sort of spring next year.
So we'll keep our fingers crossed for some good weather.
Yes, good question. Good question. Yes. Well, no, I don't think we do. I think we just have to get used to having umbrellas. Big ones, very big ones.
It's a prerequisite for living in Preston, certainly.
Well, it is. I mean, it's interesting. I contributed to writing the brief for the Square for the RABA competition, and one of the things we said there was Preston is the wettest city in England, according to the Met Office, since 1980, average rainfall. So it rains for about a third of the days in the year in Preston, but not all day, I hasten to add. So I think some of the design has been influenced. If you look at the front of the building, there is a large sort of canopy in front of it. So I think that will give you a little bit of protection. And I expect on rainy days, people will be walking along in front of it, trying to keep dry. But I think, the city puts on lots of great events, like Lancashire Encounter and things. The canopies you mentioned right at the beginning were a response to that, to produce things that would cover people in the weather. So I think we just have to look at things like that, which are more like gazebo and tent light to keep us in the fresh air, but to stop us being washed away. I mean, Johnny's film is really nice because I don't know if this was in your intention, Johnny, but you captured Preston, on a wet day, on more than one wet day.
Several wet days, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was yeah, I mean, that's what contributed to the mud as well on site. But yeah, I think yeah, like you say, it was there's a variety of weathers there, and hopefully I think whatever gets programmed to happen there when it's all completed bears that all in mind. I mean, I think one of the great hopefully one of the great possibilities about the square being so open is that there's some opportunities for sort of pop-up performances and open air open air gigs or open air performances of different kinds. I think that would be something that would really kind of bring the space alive, just as someone who might go there as a punter.
I think you're right. I think I would really like to hope that it's a space where all sorts of people can perform, quite easily without too much bureaucracy. And it's somewhere where that if you live locally, you think, well, I might pop there on a Sunday lunchtime because I know I'm going to see something. I don't need to check what it's going to be. I know it's going to be interesting and engaging. And if you think the university has just under 3,000 art and design students, including performing arts students, film students, also all the visual arts. So there is a whole wealth of talent there. It'd be nice that there was a clear sort of way of seeing their talents, an uncluttered way, an accessible way of seeing their talents, I think. Because I think that's also going to help the city engage. I think sometimes, of course, students don't walk around with big labels saying student on their back, but students engage in all sorts of ways in the city, but sometimes it's not that visible.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot. There's you know, I mean, this is for further conversation, but about that's all sort of centered around, well, who feels as if they have ownership of that space. And I think, you know, what makes a space feel as if you could, you know, busk there, or as opposed to it feeling like it's becomes almost like a venue, where it's, you know, you're told what's programmed there, and everything that happens there is approved, and whether, if, yeah, it's just, I think it's interesting to think, well, who feels like it's something that they can create, kind of co-create, really, whether is there a way that the public and the people and UCLan can feel as if it's a space in which they can kind of co-create what happens there, and I think that's exciting, to have a new space like that.
I think your film has sort of opened some of those doors. I know you know we're having discussions at the university about how we form a group that does connect with the community and the university, so we can sort of understand how to use that space to its best possible advantage. I think it's interesting, ownership of public spaces. We all feel we own certain spaces in parks and squares and things, especially if we use them a lot, even though we might not actually own the lease or the deeds on them. So I think, you know, that's, and in some ways, I suppose that's a real measure of success of a public space, isn't it? That people do feel they own it, that it's theirs, that it's not owned by some corporation or whatever, or owned by the city council, that it's actually a space where people do feel they have a certain amount of freedom to express themselves in.
Yeah. I think we've touched on it a few times, but we've talked about how the film is a conversation starter. So we've had a few questions through, and there's obviously been lots of discussion between us. So there'll continue to be questions, I'm sure. There'll continue to be information to be shared. So how are you planning to continue that conversation beyond this evening?
Well, I think, you know, we're getting welcome comments through your blog press. I think that's really important. And I say in the future, we're looking at trying to put a group together that's cross university and community, which can help us formulate how we manage the space in the future.
How will people be able to get involved in that then?
I think well,
advertising it ourselves.
You may be, yes. I suppose we're not quite at that moment, but we'll definitely come back to you. Yes, we value our partnership with Blog Preston very much.
Yeah, it sounds like a really good way to get all interested parties involved. Anyway. Okay, so I don't think we've had any more questions through on the chat. Is there anything else, Johnny or Charles, you'd like to cover? We're just about on time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just one final thing that I'd add, and it's sort of relevant to that last point about how the conversation continues a little bit, is that I think even though sort of Charles said that the film, you know, is feels like it's about a moment in time, I think it was really important for the film to sort of continue to have relevance over the you know, the coming months and years, as the space is, the construction of the space is completed and the use of the space hopefully happens. But I think I hope that the film continues to have relevance in that sense, in that it continues to pose questions and to offer provocations about the continued use of it, really.
Well, I think one of the things I sort of missed to mention really is that when the building is open, the new student building, it has screens and so forth inside. Our intention is to show this film really, so it's almost like holding us to it in that sense, that people coming into the building will see this film over a period of time, and whenever they want to. And so those questions are still going to be asked even once the building is open and the square starts to function. But I think it will be, any new space obviously takes time to understand. You can look at it from the drawings and try and understand it, but it's very different when it actually happens. So I think the university intends to be reflective throughout the process. So we're going to make mistakes and we're going to learn from them and then try again. And we can only do that with the help of everybody.
Cool. Okay, so I think we will draw the event to a close. Thank you to everybody that's tuned in at home. Thank you, Johnny and Charles, for the discussion and all your insights. We will be publishing the film on the Blog Preston website, and we'll also be sharing some of the highlights from this evening. So if any further questions come through as well, we will look to address those on the blog. So that's blogpreston.co.uk. But otherwise, I think for now, we will sign off from me, Kate, Johnny and Charles. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Cool, thanks.
Bye-bye.